Francis Ngannou is interested to join back the UFC, according to his head coach. There's been a lot of reports that have been spreading through Twitter about Ngannou's interest in coming back to the UFC. I'll give you guys my thoughts on this, but before I do, if you guys can, please hit that subscribe button and let's again shoot for 10 likes on this video. Anyways, let's get into it. So Francis Ngannou, finally with the reports, wants to return to the UFC, and it's honestly very interesting that Ngannou wants to return. Just to kind of give a little bit of a revision, a little bit of history about the Francis Ngannou versus the UFC kind of wars. Francis's big issue was that he wasn't getting paid enough. The whole politics is, Francis Ngannou's value to the company. And, Dana White thought that he deserved a lot less in terms of the financial that he gets to fight. And Ngannou wanted to get paid more, with the whole UFC fighter pay politics. Ngannou left the UFC, joins the PFL, and personally, when he did that, yes, he might have gotten a lot more money, but I felt like that was the worst move in terms of his MMA career. And that is because the minute that Francis defeats the best fighter or the best heavyweight from the PFL, who will go and step up and fight against him next? And vice versa with Francis, who will he fight after Renan? That'll be like a solid win on his book. You know what I mean? Outside of Renan Ferreira, I feel like the heavyweights after aren't necessarily that good enough to maybe even rank in the UFC. That's how bad the PFL heavyweight division is. Not too long ago, I believe just a couple years ago, when they had Renan Ferreira, I believe it was the year that Renan Ferreira won the PFL tournament in 2023. That same year, Jordan Heiderman fought on the Ultimate Fighter and lost in the Ultimate Fighter and was able to get the 4 seed on there, right? And he's someone who lost in the Ultimate Fighter and was able to be one of the top heavyweight prospects in the PFL. So that's to put it in perspective about how bad the competition is in the PFL compared to the UFC. And with someone who is a heavyweight champion from the UFC comes to PFL, after one fight, it's like who all are going to fight him next? You know what I mean? So it just doesn't make sense, especially with his MMA career. Competition doesn't make sense with the PFL. That's why he also did money fights with boxing, shocked the world with the Tyson Fury loss. Even though yes, he did lose, knocked down Tyson Fury, one of the best, boxers at the time. And, he lost against Anthony Joshua, got knocked out against AJ in the second round. And yeah, that's where we're at right now. That's where we're at with Francis Ngannou. And so, honestly, if the UFC and Francis deal works out, what should be next for Francis Ngannou? Should he immediately just go for the belt or just go and make the super fight? And me personally, with Dana White teaming up with Turkey and having business relations together, I think the smart, the most opportunistic way, especially get the UFC back on the good side of the narratives and making a super fight, is to do John Jones and Francis Ngannou. That is the most perfect fight to make if you are Dana White. If you sign Francis Ngannou, right, might as well just relinquish the belt, from John Jones, make that a super fight, and then we can have the heavyweight division keep going with Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane fighting for the undisputed belt. And then we go on from there, right? Because let's say hypothetically Francis wins against John Jones. That's the number one contender then to go fight for Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane. And boom, we have another massive fight to make in the UFC. And it's just everything lines up so perfect if Francis comes back and if they decide to make John Jones and Francis. And I think, if I kind of want to go back to the Turkey point. If Dana White, teams up with Turkey to make the John Jones Francis fight, the perfect way to go about that would, honestly have Turkey kind of pitch in and maybe increase the fight purse, especially on, both ends with John Jones and Francis. If, Francis historically has had an issue with UFC fighter pay, I think, Turkey, which, we've seen with the boxers how much money they can make, I think he can spare some and also pay Ngannou to make one of the biggest fights in MMA history. And so I'm actually, with this news about Francis, did the plan fail about, him wanting to, get paid more, maybe have like a successful career outside of the UFC. Did that really work for him? Not necessarily, because of, the PFL always being that B league. But I think going back to the UFC, getting a chance, to go against the best of the best, and, cementing more of his legacy, being up there, trying to, go up there, be one of the all-time greats within the UFC, or all-time great within the heavyweights, which I already think he's already like the all-time great for heavyweight. You can argue a few others, but I think Ngannou is like, who could beat Ngannou? You know what I mean, in heavyweight. So yeah, I think, Francis is at a very interesting spot if he comes back to the UFC. I think there's fights that are lined up for him. And, he left being the heavyweight champion. You know what I mean? I think it feels right to come back and either go for a super fight or immediately fight for the title. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the whole Francis Ngannou situation. I think it would be very cool if he decides to come back to the UFC, and honestly, get some MMA fights under his belt. We haven't really seen him too active within the UFC. Before the what is it? After the Cyril Gane fight, we only saw one MMA fight from him, and that was against Renan Ferreira, who was the best fighter out of the PFL, and he destroyed him. So yeah, I don't know. What would be next for Francis if he stayed in the PFL? It would really be nothing. He'd be kind of just taken to the side of the dust if he would have kept being on the PFL. He would have been just a bit more forgotten if he would have stayed in the PFL, in my personal opinion. So yeah, if you guys like this video and want more videos like this, please hit the like, comment, and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.